Okay, we're going in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, one and all, to week 2 of the Cheese Trap Book Club. I'm Noah Gittell. I'm the Physicians Committee's Director of Philanthropy for the Eastern Region, and I am coming to you today from my home office in Connecticut. Yes, before you ask, my dog might make an appearance again. Now, I know some of you are new to the Cheese Trap Book Club because we got a few emails and calls from folks who misread last week's email and thought that we were beginning at 7 p.m. Eastern. It was a little confusing. It was on the 7th at 6 p.m. That's tough. But we've cleared it up with everyone, so we're so glad to have such a large group with us tonight. And I want to give a special shout out to 2 of you, and that would be Rhett and Lydia from Arizona, who called us to make sure they had the time right because they are 1 month into their new plant-based life. And they're really excited about the support they're going to get tonight. So congratulations, Rhett and Lydia. And folks in the chat box, it'd be great if you could show Rhett and Lydia some support as well. Thank you for being here. And we've got some fantastic stuff lined up for you today. We're going to be focusing on where cheese comes from. And to dig into that, we're going to hear from some excellent guests. First off, you know him. It's the founder and president of Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Dr. Neal Barnard. Hi, Neal.
Where is that mute button when you need it? Hi there, Noah. Welcome, everybody.
Next up, we have PCRM's registered dietitian. You know her from week 1 of the Cheese Trap Book Club, Stephanie McBurnett. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, everyone. I'll be answering questions in the Q&A box. The chat is reserved for discussion and cheerleading and just talking amongst each other. If you have a specific question, put it in the Q&A box. But again, I can't answer any personal medical questions on a webinar, unfortunately.
Correct. But if you do have personal medical issues, you can always contact the Barnard Medical Clinic, and we'd love to see you there. Finally, our very special guest tonight is a longtime Physicians Committee supporter who has really put his beliefs into action and made a huge difference for animals, especially for dairy cows. He's the inventor and founder of Treeline Cheese. Please welcome Mr. Michael Schwartz. Hi, Michael.
Yeah, hi, everyone. You may also please welcome Boris, my cat, who makes appearances from time to time on Zoom calls.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Boris. It's a family show tonight. So before I turn it over to the presenters, I was thinking a little bit about my relationship with cheese this morning, and I wanted to share it with you because last week I told you all that I didn't really have a hard time giving up cheese, and that's true. But I did have a hard time figuring out that I needed to give up cheese. When I was a kid, I ate string cheese, which doesn't really look like an animal product. I ate those little individual cheeses that came in the red wax. I don't remember exactly what they're called, but I loved those. And none of those looked like animals to me. They just looked like some kind of food. So even when I went vegetarian for ethical and for health reasons, I still kind of thought cheese was okay because to my mind, they didn't have to kill anything to make it, so I didn't have a problem with it. And then when I stopped eating meat and my cholesterol kept going up, that's when I realized maybe there was more to this whole cheese issue and I began digging into it. So my point is just that, you know, it's a journey for all of us, and some animal products may require a little more work to see the cruelty and see the health problems associated with them. So we're going to do that work tonight, but it's going to be enjoyable work. It's going to be fun work. And please let us know in the chat box, you know, if you can relate to my story, share your own story, and let's just get into it. To tell us more about all of this, here is the aforementioned Dr. Neal Barnard.
Well, thank you, Noah. I'm delighted to be back. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I want to say a shout out to Marty Wasserman, who was here last week, Dr. Wasserman, who talked about his journey with cheese. I see he's in the chat too. So hi, Marty. Hi, Barbara. Welcome to all of you. And thanks for coming back. I'd like to talk about something that in various books that I have written, I have never discussed up until now, which is sort of the ethical side of food. You know, books that I've written are about diabetes or weight loss or whatever. But when I started looking into cheese, I was surprised about some of the connections. And so I want to share them with you. But I want to back up. Let me share my screen. And I want to talk about where cheese comes from. And starting with the health side of things, and let's see where we end up. Okay, last time I showed you these pictures, and in case you weren't with us, if you get in your car in Milwaukee and you drive out west, you'll be in a town called Theresa, Wisconsin. And in this cheese factory, the milk comes in, they add bacteria to it to ferment it. And you know what we talk about that bacteria? That's the Brevibacteria that you have between your toes. They throw that into the milk here to make it ferment and smell like, you know what? And then they add rennet, which either comes from a stomach of a calf or else it's genetically engineered that coagulates it. They drain the whey off and then you end up with solid cheese. You salt it up. We went through this last week, but it's good to remember that that's from the nutrition standpoint, what you've just done is increase the fat, increase the cholesterol, increase the sodium. And as you might imagine, this could lead to some health problems. So let's jump into this a little bit. This is Catherine. Catherine grew up in Louisiana. She was an Air Force aerospace engineer, and she went to Iraq in 2003 with the Air Force. And her job was to set up military bases. And if you are working really hard and you're eating only what the government provides, you don't gain a whole lot of weight. But eventually her tour of duty came to an end. The government sent her back to DC, back to the US. And when she got off the plane, her family said, "Okay, Catherine, what did you miss while you were overseas?" She said, "You know what I really missed? I missed cheese, mac and cheese snacks and so forth." And a friend of hers took pity on her and bought her an entire case of 48 boxes of mac and cheese dinners, which Catherine ate for 48 days straight. That's right. And she gained weight, but she also started to develop some pain in her abdomen. And over time, her doctor diagnosed this as endometriosis. And endometriosis is a painful condition that can be sometimes severe and even debilitating. And it's a common cause of infertility. So she went to the doctor and the doctor said, "Okay, this is what you have. Endometriosis is a condition where little pockets of cells that ought to be lining the uterus have escaped and they're now implanting all around the abdomen." And so the doctor gave her pain medications. The doctor eventually put her on hormonal medications and nothing really helped. And so finally the doctor said, "Well, there is a treatment that we could give you. It's a hysterectomy. Let's just take everything out and your pain's going to go away." Well, Catherine was 27 and she was a newlywed, and she and her husband were sort of hoping to have a family at some point. So she said to the doctor, "Is there something I can do other than the hysterectomy, because I don't really want to be infertile?" And her doctor said, "Catherine, your endometriosis is so advanced, you're probably infertile anyway. You got nothing to lose but your pain. Go ahead and have your uterus removed and you'll feel better." Okay. So she thought, well, nothing else is helping and I'm already infertile, so I may as well have the operation. So she agreed. And they scheduled it for 6 weeks later. But before she could have the operation, a friend suggested that she go see somebody about her diet. And she talked with the diet counselor about her love of cheese and macaroni and all these kinds of things. And the nutrition counselor said to her, "Why don't you try a completely plant-based diet? Just get away from the cheese, get away from all dairy, get away from meat and animal products altogether. Keep oils really low." Well, she wasn't too keen on this idea, but she thought, I'll give it a try. I've got nothing to lose. So she did, and she started noticing that she was losing weight and her energy was getting better and her pain started to diminish. And as the weeks went by, her pain got a lot better. But it didn't entirely go away. Although it was much better, there was some part of the pain that just would not go away. And so she decided, all right, I may as well go ahead and have the operation anyway. So she went to the hospital on the morning of her operation, the hysterectomy, and they put her to sleep. About an hour later, she woke up. She was in the recovery room. And the doctor was there, and he said, "Catherine, I need to tell you something. I opened you up, but I noticed something. Your endometriosis is practically gone. And the only reason that you have a little bit of pain left is because you have adhesions from the scarring. And all I had to do was to free up that scarring, and I didn't do the hysterectomy. You've still got your uterus. I left it alone. I just sewed you back up. And I have no idea why your endometriosis is gone." Her mother was there with her, and her mother said, "Well, she went vegan." And then the doctor said, "Stop it. Endometriosis is not caused by what you eat, and there is no diet that is going to make it go away. This has just got to be a miracle. Miracles happen every day." Well, miracle or not, she felt dramatically better, and she went on to do great things, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. But first, let me explain to you what endometriosis is. This is the uterus, and that pink lining in the middle, that's the endometrial layer. And for some women, that expands too much in the course of a month. And when it does, it releases prostaglandins that cause pain. That's common menstrual cramps. For some women, like Catherine, it gets worse. Those little dark raisins you see are endometrial tissue that have escaped out the fallopian tubes. They're now outside the uterus, and they're implanting. They implant on the outside of the uterus. They implant on the ovaries, on the fallopian tubes, even on your intestinal tract. And researchers in Detroit pointed out that they can be very widespread all across your abdominal cavity. Well, this is what she had. But she had the procedure. When she had the procedure, the doctor opened her up and said, "This is all somehow gone away as a result of the diet change." And in fact, she continued with a healthy diet. She lost a ton of weight, and she wasn't actually infertile. She now has 3 kids. And Catherine then dedicated her life to helping other women to take back their health. She's now one of our Food for Life instructors and has a terrific teaching center in Texas. Okay, so wait a minute. We've been talking about milk, cheese, hormones. What's that about? Well, every year, a dairy cow is impregnated because you have to be pregnant, you have to give birth in order to make milk, and they are milked into their pregnancy, and a pregnant cow makes lots of estradiol. That's a female hormone. And there's some of it in the plasma, but a lot of it gets into the milk. And if they milk the cow during their pregnancy, as they do, it gets into cheese, yogurt, ice cream. Every glass of milk you ever drank had female sex hormones, estradiol, in it. Okay, so could that affect my health? Well, in addition to be a possible driver of endometriosis, it may be a driver of breast cancer. I showed this slide last time, but I want to just come back to it because it's very relevant to what we're talking about today. This was a study that was done by Gary Fraser and his team at Adventist Health Study 2. Huge study, more than 60,000 participants. And what they showed along the x-axis here, this is milk consumption, going from none to a quarter cup, half cup, a cup, 2 cups of milk a day. The y-axis, going vertically, that's breast cancer risk. And as you can see, going from 0 to maybe just a half a cup a day, you see breast cancer rising. Prior studies had missed this because they were looking at average women who are all consuming sort of about the same amount of dairy. You couldn't really tease out the effects. But when you look at this wide range, you can suddenly see the relationship. Okay, so does this mean that the hormones in dairy can affect the hormones in a woman's body? In Australia, 2010, researchers brought in almost 800 women. They were all after the age of menopause, and they looked at estradiol levels in their blood. And it was true. The more dairy servings that you have per week, this could be anything, milk, yogurt, ice cream, cheese, the higher the amount of hormones that get into your body. That's of concern to doctors because hormones can spell cancer. Okay. Well, what if a woman had cancer? If you look at a woman previously diagnosed with breast cancer. Her risk of dying of her disease goes up with the more high-fat dairy that she consumes. The green bar is a woman who has had breast cancer in the past, but she tends to avoid high-fat dairy. She's not eating the butter and the cheese and whole milk and that kind of stuff. The red bar is a woman who's having at least one serving of high-fat dairy per day, like a cheese pizza, as many women do. And the risk of dying of a pre-existing cancer is increased by 50%. So what we're seeing is, okay, cows are impregnated, they're making hormones, the hormones are getting into dairy, and that's a problem for us. Oh, not just women. University of Rochester, researchers went into a fertility clinic. They looked at the fertility for men who tended to have about a half a serving of cheese per day, and those who had at least one serving of cheese per day, and you can see the difference. You see a reduction in sperm counts, sperm morphology, that means the shape, sperm motility, meaning can they swim straight? All these things seem to be impaired the more cheese a man consumes. So your 8-year-old daughter, your 7-year-old son, anybody in the family who's having cheese is getting hormones that can affect their biology. All right, so I mentioned that the cows are impregnated every year. And you might imagine that this is done on a romantic hillside with Barry Manilow records and maybe some roses and chocolates and so forth. No, the cows are not impregnated in a particularly nice way. A lot of people, as Noah was saying at the beginning, think that there couldn't be ethical issues with regard to dairy because they don't kill the cows, right? So what could be wrong? Well, let's dig in. To tell this story, I'd like to actually call on the United Nations. The United Nations makes farming manuals for farmers all across the world. It shows them how to make more profit with whatever they're raising. And they have a bunch of these things for dairy farmers. So you aren't going to get any dairy unless your cow gets pregnant. And this is how they do it. And they use these diagrams. It's very low literacy because they're working in many different languages. And sometimes people don't have much education. So they use a lot of these diagrams. These are not my diagrams. These are this is actually published by the United Nations. To get a cow to give birth, you must first take a glove. And you put the glove on your left hand, it goes all the way up to your shoulder, and you stick your hand into the cow's rectum, all the way up to about your elbow. And through the rectal wall, you can feel the uterus of the cow. You grab that uterus with your left hand and hold it still. Then with your right hand, you take what looks like a knitting needle and jam it through the cow's cervix. And you then inject semen that you took from a bull. Now, these animals are not volunteers, but they're not going to object. She can't object. She's chained by the neck. She's going to be impregnated that day, whether she wants to be or not. This is the way it looks in Wisconsin or Florida or New York or anywhere else. The gestation of a pregnant cow is about 9 months. And 9 months later, she gives birth. And I want to tell you something. There is nothing cuter than a newborn calf. They are awkward. This calf is kind of a bag of bones and looking up at mom, and mom's looking down at the calf, and the farmhands all gather around, and they'll get a little tear in their eyes. This just gets me every time to see this cute little baby. And so the mother's licking the calf, and the calf's looking up at mom. And then pretty soon somebody says, well, wait a minute now. If the calf drinks very much of mom's milk, there's not going to be anything left for us to sell. I mean, we want her milk for us, right? That's a commercial product. So they have an implement that they use to solve this problem, and the implement is a wheelbarrow. You pick the calf up by the chest, and you put the calf into the wheelbarrow, and you carry the calf out of the room. Now, there's no bond in nature stronger than that between a mother and her baby, and it doesn't matter what species you are. The mother sees that you're taking her calf away, and she will follow, saying in her own way as best she can, that's my baby. And eventually a gate will slam in her face, and she will stand there and cry out. And the baby, if the baby is male, you know this, the male calves don't live very long. They become veal because people have acquired a taste for the rubbery muscle tissue of a newborn calf. Now, if the calf is female, she will be kept in an isolation hutch. She will not get her mother's milk. She'll get a milk substitute because the cow's milk gets sold, and she will eat milk substitute until she's old enough to have somebody's hand up her rectum. And then she will get pregnant and be part of the same thing. To the mom, this happens every year for about 4 years. And for the baby, this will happen about a year from now and will happen again for about 4 years. And after about 4 years, something happens, which is that the cows are killed because they don't produce enough milk to justify their continued existence. In nature, a cow would live to be about 20. But on a dairy farm, they live to be about 4, because farmers realize that they make more money by just using the offspring and killing the mothers, and they become low-grade hamburger. As I was doing research for the cheese trap, I came across this news story from Newburyport, Massachusetts. It came out in 2013. Strange noises coming from High Road near Sunshine Dairy Farm Monday night and into yesterday morning prompted local police to alert residents that there's nothing spooky or scary going on. According to Newbury Police Sergeant Patty Fisher, the noises are coming from mother cows who are lamenting the separation from their calves. It happens every year at the same time. So what I'm saying is that the mothers don't have more than just a few hours with their babies who are then taken away. Now, if you go to the health food store, you will see this brand, Organic Valley Milk. And they show a person, this is his baby, and they show the dairy cow kind of looking on, and they have a lot of these that are just sort of a cruel irony, that they show human beings raising their families, and they have cows in the background whose offspring have all been taken away from them. And they pretend that this is somehow nice and fun and wholesome and helpful. The females have one other fate. They're going to live long enough to have their horns cut out because you don't want them hurting anybody. And so this is a painful process that many veterinarians refuse to participate in. But it's absolutely routine. Every month in the United States, about 200,000 dairy cows are slaughtered. They all die. Nobody lives. And so this question, are they killed or not? Yeah, all dairy cows are killed, and that's true in the United States. It's true overseas. It may even be true, let's say you are in India and you say, well, don't they respect the cows? They find ways to make the calves kind of go away by forgetting to feed them or selling them to a person who may not object to them being killed. The dairy industry is a meat industry. It's just that before you turn into hamburger, they are artificially inseminated, impregnated, and then their infants are taken away 3 or 4 times, and then you're killed. Okay, if I haven't cheered you up enough yet, let's talk about what's happening to the environment. When I go home to where I grew up in North Dakota, this is a picture I took outside of Fargo, which is my hometown. And that's beautiful corn as far as the eye can see. And if you went down and you looked closely, all the plants are identical. And the reason they're identical is they're genetically modified, and no human will eat a single one of those corn cobs. That's cattle feed or chicken feed or hog feed. And it's genetically modified, so it's easy to raise and really cheap to raise, and you can feed it to the dairy cows or the beef cows or the chickens or the pigs. The problem is that you've got to irrigate it, and you have to have pesticides and fertilizer. And you irrigate it a lot. Whatever doesn't come from the sky comes from irrigation. Does that matter? Well, let's say you brush your teeth and you leave the water going the whole time. You could run about a gallon of water. Let's say you take a shower and you luxuriate for a while. You could use as much as 20 gallons of water in a shower. Wash your car, 65 gallons. A gallon of milk. Because of all the water it takes to irrigate the crops, to feed to the cows, it's about 683 gallons of water to produce 1 gallon of milk. Okay. And then there's fertilizer that you use to raise the corn And the fertilizer sends nitrogen and phosphorus into the rivers. And then as the fertilizer goes downstream, algae overgrow. They kill other life forms. And then the algae die. And we have a dead zone right at the bottom of the Mississippi River, which has been collecting fertilizer from across the United States and dumping it underneath Louisiana and Texas. And the dead zone is about the size of New Jersey, 8,000 square miles, where nothing lives in the Gulf of Mexico. Thanks to raising all of these crops, not for human consumption, but to feed the cows and the other animals. And the livestock also produce methane. This is the cow, by the way, it's coming out the front end, it's belching. Because of the ruminant digestion they have, they belch methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. Livestock also produce 9% of CO2 and 65% of nitrous oxide from their manure. So I saw this cartoon, I thought it was rather telling. What are you doing? I'm killing this baby. Why are you doing that? I want to drink his mother's milk. Why not drink something else? Oh, don't be so extreme. For those of you who have changed your diet, you might know of some people who find that an odd choice, but it might be even odder to think about what other people do to put the cheese on their pizza. Good news is that you can have a pizza with no cheese at all, and there are lots of products. So I'm going to turn it back to Noah, but before I do, let me just say that in tonight's episode and also the episode next week, you're going to hear some things that might be troubling. But my hope is that we will use this to learn, and then we will connect with other people through social media or over the dinner table and share what we know. Because if we want to be kind to animals, kind to the environment, kind to your coronary arteries, you need a megaphone. And it's no good to know something unless we share it. So that's where we are. Thank you. And back to you, Noah.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. That was harrowing, but it was well said, and it was certainly edifying. I'm sure for all of the people trying to give up cheese, that could have been a life-changing experience for them. And for those of us who have already, it's always good to reinforce where we're coming from. And I want to call out a comment from Tricia Sexton, who said in the chat box, "This is rough to watch, but it is just indicative of how removed we all are from the ugly truth." And I think that is just right, because in my experience, when I talk to people who have recently given up dairy, they're sort of gobsmacked that it took them this long to figure it out. And they can't believe they didn't put it all together, just how cruel this industry was. But once you figure it out, there's no going back. I did want to bring Stephanie in here for a minute, because I saw an interesting question that she answered in the Q&A about dairy and coffee. Stephanie, could you share that with the group?
Yes, so there was a bunch of great questions, so I have a list, but one fun one that kind of came up was someone asked what the best coffee creamer is, like the best replacement. And, my answer is, really anything that's not dairy is good for the animals, but for your health, you want to shy away from the coconut milk substitutions. And then if you're working down, I just put a little bit of plain soy milk, unsweetened soy milk in my coffee. So anyone else have any suggestions?
Unsweetened soy milk for me every day. But I know it's a tough one for people. Michael, did you have a thought?
Well, black coffee. It's really good.
It's hardcore.
I'd have a suggestion, but I'm not old enough to drink coffee. So maybe people can throw their favorites in the chat too.
Mm-hmm.
I see some good suggestions there already. Cashew milk, organic oat milk, soy milk, and date syrup. That's an interesting one.
No,
Anyway.
I did have another good question, probably for Dr. Barnard. Someone asked, will your cholesterol be raised if you're eating nuts and nut butter? So will nuts and nut butter raise your cholesterol?
Excellent question. The short answer is no. First of all, if you're consuming dairy, you are getting a lot of cholesterol and you're getting a lot of saturated fat. Dairy is the main source of saturated fat, which is a cholesterol driver. Saturated fat is the main driver of cholesterol. If you're getting away from that, that's good. Nuts don't have that effect. Now, that said, we don't want to go crazy. When I was a kid, some days my whole lunch was peanut butter and a spoon. So I'm not suggesting you do that, but no, nuts are not going to raise your cholesterol.
Great answer.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for the questions, everybody. And we may have time at the end for more. So please put your cheese, your dairy questions into the Q&A. Stephanie has been hard at work there answering them, but we love your questions and we'll take as many as you got. And now I would like to pass it over to our next presenter. And I've known Michael Schwartz for quite a long time now. And Michael, hold your ears for this part. He is one of my favorite people that I've met in this job, particularly because he is firm in his beliefs. He is unabashedly compassionate towards animals, and he's somebody who is really making a difference in this world. And I think you'll be very inspired to hear his story. So let me bring you in, Michael, and let me prompt you and just ask, where did tree line cheese come from for you?
Well, firstly, thanks, Noah. I really appreciate that and your compliments. So I think that the easiest place to start really is my growing up in South Africa. And I grew up in South Africa during the time of apartheid. I'm 62 years old, and a lot of people younger than me don't even know what that word means. But essentially, what I grew up with was a forced segregation of races and very harsh laws that denied people who weren't white basic human rights. And you may ask, well, how does that relate to cheese? And here's how it relates to cheese. And this really occurred to me while Neil was describing how calves are taken away from their parents. I mean, that's precisely what apartheid did. It forced Black people to make a choice of finding work in a white area and leaving their families in a Black area, or staying in the Black area, not working. So what I saw was families that were broken up because of a kind of a twisted view of racial superiority. And my parents were very strong opponents of apartheid, and my father was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. And my parents instilled in me the belief that just because other people are doing things, it doesn't make it right. And when I look back on that, I realized that a lot of the things that are going on with the way we eat were actually going on in South Africa, because we were considered, as anti-apartheid people, extremists. And when we advocated that Black people should have rights and families shouldn't be split up, people said, well, that's really extreme. And that's what people say about vegans. That's what people say about people who advocate for rights for animals. And I hope one day in my lifetime, people will look back on what we do to animals in the same way as we look back on apartheid, and just say, how could you ever have done that? It's just ridiculous. It doesn't stand up to any kind of scrutiny. Anyhow, that said, I went through a very similar evolution to what a lot of people have done. They give up meat because they believe they should stop killing animals. Sorry, my cat is making an appearance again. And I lived in denial of what the dairy industry was doing for many, many years. Neil was one of the people instrumental in convincing me that I should not live in denial and I should really face up to the reality of what the dairy industry is. So thanks for saying these things, as unpleasant as it is to sit through the reality, it has to be said. Now for the nice part. I was always a big fan of cheese. I practiced intellectual property law for 25 years. And during that time, spent a lot of time in Europe with clients, in France and Italy particularly. And I have to say, there's nothing that taste better than really good French and Italian cheese. But that's, so what? I mean, if something has to suffer for that, how could you even stomach it, in my opinion? So I set about trying to create a substitute or an alternative to these really good French and Italian cheeses. And I started experimenting, came up with some pretty nice recipes, and started a business. Today, our Treeline is in 3,000 stores nationwide and is recognized as a real brand, creating a new category, a new way of eating. And I think that it's a key piece of the puzzle of ending this addiction to cheese. And that is, you've got to give an alternative. And I feel that my contribution to animal rights and the environment and human health lies in giving that alternative. So that was quite a long-winded story. There's more, but I'll stop at that point.
Thanks, Michael. I'm going to turn over to Neil in a minute, but I wanted to ask, when you first started Treeline and were trying to get it into stores, for example, because you were one of the first vegan cheeses really out there, certainly gourmet vegan cheeses, was there a pushback to the very idea of vegan cheese? And have you seen changes in that area over the years? How would you describe those changes?
Yeah, there two things were going on. On the one hand, you had people going, why would you ever want to not have dairy cheese? And the other is, well, what is it? What is it that you're trying to sell us? And it was very difficult. In the grocery industry, everybody's competing for a very small amount of shelf space. And to go into a grocery chain and say they should kick something out and make space so you can put in a product they've never heard of, that's a real challenge. Now, you know, that's changing, but it's still a challenge. It's not over yet by any means.
And as other cheeses have come onto the market, other vegan cheeses, have you seen the market for all cheeses expand, or how does the competition work for you?
You know, it's like a lawyer a town that only has one lawyer. He's got nothing to do. You get two lawyers and they're both really busy. So it's similar to that. But so yes, the market has definitely grown. The stores are more open to taking non-dairy cheese. But we're now running into something that Stephanie alluded to, which is quite a disturbing trend. And that is the use of coconut oil for dairy alternatives. This is something I've avoided at Treeline. I just avoid it because it's just basically saturated fat. And a lot of the vegan cheeses are not really providing a nutritional alternative to dairy. I see this as a real problem for veganism, because I feel an obligation to provide something that's healthy. I don't think it's good enough to say, well, I'm worried about animals and I'm going to eliminate dairy, and then I'm giving human beings something that's just not good for them. I don't like to knock my competitors, but I find this trend to be very disturbing and not a good one for the movement.
Let me jump in if you don't mind. First of all, I want to salute you for that, because I've seen what Noah, I know you've seen, I'm sure Stephanie's seen it, Michael, I'm sure you have too, which is somewhere out of the blue, people are putting coconut oil in everything and palm oil in everything. You look at an ingredients label, and it used to be a peanut butter jar was peanut butter. But now they got to throw palm oil in there and whatever, it gives it the mouthfeel. But I want to actually ask you about something else, and that's the taste part of it and where that taste comes from. And the reason I'm asking this is, how many years ago? I'm not sure how many years ago this was, but you came to an event that we had on Long Island, and Alec Baldwin was there, and Alec was our guest of honor. And I got preoccupied with all the things that were happening, and I didn't see the beautiful buffet of tree-lined cheese. That it might have been the debut of tree-lined cheese, I think, in fact. But you very kindly gave me some, which I stuck in my pocket. And at the end of the event, it was dark and everybody left, and I got into my rental car and I was driving down the road after the event. So I thought, oh, here's this cheese that Michael Schwartz gave me. And I pulled it out and I took a bite, and it was amazing. I mean, it was, I think, there had been cheese substitutes, but they kind of tasted like a pencil eraser or something like that. But yours was really, really delicious. And I know that has been your goal, is to make something that could compete with the very best cheeses. But I want to ask you, how did you get there? How do you make that happen? Were you in your kitchen mixing it up and trying it out on friends, or how did you get I don't know if I'm asking about taste or mouthfeel or what, but tell me how you make something that attractive.
Yeah, so that was actually the launch of Treeline. And so you were an early adopter. Thank you. So
Well, delicious.
we make Treeline in almost a traditional cheese making way, in that we take cashew nuts and we add cultures to them. And this is something that people have been doing for quite a long time, but no one managed to do it at scale. And the flavors of our cheeses really are derived from natural fermentation. And to answer your question about how I did it, yes, I bought some primitive equipment, got a book out of the library, and I just started experimenting until I came up with something that was not horrible, and then tried it out on friends, and discovered that people really liked it, and started selling it in a vegan market in a bar in Brooklyn, and discovered that people were queuing up like around the block to get it. So it was just a very happy culmination of a lot of tinkering and experimenting.
Okay, and then you must have thought about things you were going to throw in, because as I recall, you had some black pepper or something like that in some of them. Or tell me what goes well in a cheese and what is not going to succeed. I don't think you have asparagus flavored cheese. Tell me what works.
I don't really have a good answer to that, because I think it's a matter of personal taste. I'm making our most popular product is herb garlic. And I'll be honest with you, I basically looked at the ingredients in Boursin, which is a dairy cheese, and thought, well, I'll make a vegan Boursin. We currently sell a vegan goat cheese, which has blueberries in it. We have strawberry cream cheese, which I find, just like as someone who came from South Africa, that's just bizarre, but people like it, so we make it. But yeah, I don't have a good answer to that, because it's just a matter of personal taste.
Michael, am I to understand that when you started Treeline Cheese, you had no experience in the food business?
Your understanding is correct.
So I'm sure everybody here would like to know, and perhaps this is a hard question for you to answer, but what gave you the confidence that you could do this? Because I think there's a lot of people who would like to do something and to make the world a better place, but they don't know how. What made you feel like I can go into a kitchen with a nut and a dream and I can make it happen?
I don't know. I think it's like a self-delusion, maybe. No, but I think that the real answer is this. I grew up with very influential parents, and my mother was somebody who she never went to college until she was 50, because they just didn't have money, and her first job was basically operating an illegal trade union for Black people, because they weren't allowed to be in white trade unions. She was also an artist and an art teacher, she used to teach the neighborhood kids art in the afternoons after school. And when people couldn't do something, she'd say, well, this week we're going to paint trees. And some of the kids would say, well, I don't know how to paint a tree. I can't do it. And she always said, there's no such thing as can't. And she always kind of made me believe that if you really put your mind to something, you work out exactly how to do it, and you'll do it. And you can't see obstacles. You've got to see solutions rather than just a bunch of obstacles.
Stephanie, you look like you've got a question that came up that you wanted to jump in on. Am I right? Oh, Stephanie, unmute yourself there.
Sorry, yes. Well, I have a bunch of questions, but I did go through the ingredients of tree line cheese, and it's pretty short list. From a dietitian standpoint, it's cashews, lemon, water, a few other things. So that was just a kind of a dietitian's statement on your cheeses, Michael, that unless someone has a cheese allergy, there's no oil in there. There's no kind of weird ingredients that people won't understand. The ingredient list was very short. But
well, that was one of my objectives. There's something kind of weird in that people say, oh, you shouldn't eat vegan cheese because it's got all kinds of weird ingredients. Well, milk has weird ingredients. It's just that they don't tell you about them, right? But yeah, one of my goals was to make the thing as simple as possible. And I wanted something that was healthy and that didn't have unpronounceable ingredients. One thing I just want to take up, I saw a comment in the chat about vegan Boursin. And again, I don't want to knock my competitors, but Boursin it's coconut oil. And I don't feel comfortable making a product that's not really good for people. So I feel like I got something better, but yeah, that's just me.
It's funny you mentioned the ingredients list because it's true. If you pick up any cheese, for some reason they get away with, they don't have to say that there's estradiol on it. It's the female sex hormone and I guess you don't have to say it because it wasn't added at the factory, it was added in the cow's body. It comes right out in the milking machinery. But and if they put on there a warning that there are female sex hormones in every dairy cheese, nobody would ever buy it. And the same is true with goat cheese. You mentioned goat cheese. I wonder how many people, I don't know if you imagine, if you think that people imagine that goat cheese is somehow healthier, or maybe it's kind, maybe they don't kill the kids, maybe they just end up in goat yoga or something like that, and that the goat cheese is somehow more ethical. Do you get that kind of question too?
Yeah, I do. And I actually just recently did a letter that we're going to send out to people on our mailing list about why we created goat cheese. And the simple answer is, I use the metaphor of visiting the Woodstock Farm Sanctuary, which is near our facility, and seeing all the goats there that have been rescued from the goat cheese industry. And the answer is the same as, the answer to why goat cheese is the same as why non-dairy cheese or why dairy cheese. I mean, it's the same industry. It's just maybe cuter animals. I don't know.
So in other words, because they end up killing the kids, and the adult goats don't live all that long either for the same reason. So you have now made a tree line version of what's essentially goat cheese. Does it have, what do you call it?
Vegan goat cheese.
Goat cheese without the goat.
Right.
Well, I have to salute you. I got to say, when I was writing the Cheese Trap, I got every dairy book I could get and all the book about how to do it, and I got a bunch about raising goats. And this seems, you know more about this than me, but my sense was that it's often a smaller industry. Some people might be doing something else, and they get a few goats, and they kind of put their toe in this. And so in this particular book, that was a how-to book, it said, eventually you're going to have to come to terms with something, that you're going to have to kill the offspring. because otherwise you're going to go bankrupt having to feed all these male goats that you can't milk. And the book just said, get used to it. And how many people go out to, a little bit out of town, there's this really pretty place and the little goats look so cute and they don't want to tell you where it all comes from. From a nutritional standpoint, I was surprised that it's actually slightly worse, a little bit higher in fat, a little bit higher in the saturated fat. And of course, if you think about it for 2 minutes, that's why people buy it, because it's a little bit richer than the cow's milk. It's a little more creamy. And that's why people get it, but it's just as cool. So anyway.
Yeah, just if you take a pencil and paper and just write down the numbers of, if you've got, say, 5 animals, females, and those 5 females have 5 babies each year, right? And you do this for several years, just work out how many excess animals there are. There is no way any business can survive doing anything but killing those animals. There's no way they can possibly just put them out to pasture and let them play like whatever goats play at or cows play at. It's just never going to work. And the meat and dairy are so inextricably linked. And dairy is basically a death machine for these animals.
One thing that I have to say though, when people make the switch that you've made, and that Noah made, and that everybody made, and so many people on this watching us have made, they're suddenly doing something really, really important and positive. Suddenly you're part of a movement that's actually protecting the animals, protecting the earth. Suddenly you're liberating all of that terrain that was going to be used for feed crops. You don't need it anymore. And suddenly the animals don't have to be raised and slaughtered. You don't have to have farmhands doing things that are going to make them have nightmares. You don't have slaughterhouse workers doing the kinds of things that they have to do. And suddenly your coronary arteries are healing, and your doctor might have a little free time on a Wednesday afternoon because they're not dealing with so much illness anymore.
I think that's a great point, Neil. And, I mentioned earlier, so many people who are here tonight probably feel like they want to do something. But the truth is, not eating this food and choosing healthier, more humane alternatives really is doing something, because you're being kind to yourself and you're being kind to animals, and you're setting an example for others. Every time you buy Treeline cheese or another vegan cheese, somebody might see it in your shopping cart and ask what it is. You serve it to people in your home, they get a taste of it. So this circle of compassion really does expand.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for being here tonight and sharing your story. It's always a delight to talk to you. I'm glad everybody here got to be got the Michael Schwartz experience. It's a special thing.
Michael, what is your website?
Treelinecheese.com. That's
Why didn't I guess that? Treelinecheese.com.
Yeah.
Well, I see a lot of people in the chat box saying that they can't wait to run out and buy some as soon as we're done tonight. So,
Well, thanks. I'm hoping our website will be completely shut down by the huge number of people going onto it.
Well, if they do, here's what I want to ask. Go there, get the cheese, get extra, but it's not your job to eat it because you already know the story. It's your job to find somebody else who needs it on their desk tomorrow morning. Some suitable crackers, because so many people have this idea. You alluded to this a little bit ago, but people think, gee, if it's not out of a cow, is it going to be okay? Is it going to taste good? And people taste it and they realize it's very simple, totally natural, obviously much more natural than milking a cow, made from nuts and flavorings, and really delicious and really healthy. So our goal here is to convince other people that it tastes good and it's ethical and good in every possible way.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about something that means so much to me.
Well, you're welcome to stick with us. We're going to continue the discussion for a little while. I want to ask you, Stephanie, have you gotten some questions or some things that people need to know about? Because if so, as I'm looking at the clock, we've got a couple minutes to tackle any issues that might have come forward.
Well, real quick for Michael, someone asked in the chat, do you have any non-cashew based cheeses? I didn't see any, but, so they're all cashew. Okay.
Yes.
That's a quick one. These are non-tree line related questions. One of them was, someone mentioned to me that some breast cancer survivors do not eliminate dairy afterwards, and they don't get cancer again. And she asked, why is that? You know, my quick answer to her was that when people go through cancer, people make life changes. They might not be getting rid of dairy, but they're exercising more, they're sleeping better, they're managing stress, they're getting rid of processed food. And so there is a chance that that impacts their risk of getting cancer again. But what would you say to her, Neil?
Yeah, well, I mean, let's be clear. Not everybody who has cancer is going to have a bad outcome. Some people do okay, including people who have had a pretty rough road up until the treatments they've had, and some of them do fine. The same is really true with smoking. Not every smoker gets lung cancer. In fact, only a minority of smokers get lung cancer, but you don't want to fool around with it. So the slides that I showed earlier were, number one, if you look at a person who has been following a westernized diet overall, lots of dairy and so forth, their risk of getting cancer is higher. This is the Adventist Health Study 2 data, that if you're consuming even a bit of dairy compared to none, breast cancer rates are higher. But then the second thing is that a person who has had a cancer diagnosis in the past, if you look at, are you going to do okay or not, the odds of dying of that cancer are increased about 50% for the women consuming even just one serving of high-fat dairy per day. So that's just a grilled cheese sandwich or something like that. So what we want to do is line up everything in our favor if we can. And so if a person goes to the store and they say, cheddar, Velveeta, tree line, one of those choices doesn't have any estradiol in it, doesn't have any of the female sex hormones in it. That's obviously going to be a better choice. I hope that answers the question, Stephanie.
Yes. And on that point, tree line cheese doesn't have any cholesterol either. In the chat, I just read, someone asked, eliminating dairy is related to lowering your cholesterol. I'm trying to get my husband to consider giving up dairy for lowering cholesterol. So what do you have for that, Dr. Barnard?
Good idea. The person's trying to get her husband to eat a healthier diet. Well, you should go in and tell your husband that he's lucky to have you around because you're looking after him. And I think that really the thing to do is exactly what she's doing. Take some orange traffic cones, put them around the kitchen. Nobody else goes in there but you, because you're the only person competent. So you have to prepare things. You make the breakfast, lunch, dinner, and your husband is over time going to really do well with this. Now, he doesn't necessarily have to know, because you could serve him one of Michael's cheeses with some crackers, and I don't think he's going to say, this is the cashew one. He's going to say, this is delicious, honey. Do you have some more? And the same is true. You can make a chili or a spaghetti sauce or all these kinds of things. They may or may not know. The reason I'm telling you this is my mother did exactly this with my father. My mom had really high cholesterol. The doctor threatened her with statins. She thought, okay, Neil's been telling me to go vegan. I better do it. She did. Her cholesterol went way down, and she decided my father had to be vegan. Well, my father grew up on a cattle ranch. So what did she do? She gives him, the veggie burger that with enough ketchup and so forth. It took him a while to twig that he was becoming vegan too. So anyway, you can do this for your family. You can serve them healthy foods.
All right, well, it's just about 7 o'clock. I wanted to pass along one closing thought of my own, which was something I saw in the chat box that I thought was really thoughtful and beautiful. Somebody wrote, having read several reported cases of cows escaping slaughterhouses, in each case, the eyewitnesses and bystanders, probably many of whom were meat eaters, rooted for the cow. And I think that's a beautiful point because it shows that we all have compassion for these animals in our hearts. And there's a lot of room to grow out there among the non-vegan population. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to have an excellent program next week in week 3 of the Cheese Trap Book Club. Dr. Barnard will be back, of course. Stephanie will be back. And we're going to have Drina Burton, who devised the mouthwatering recipes in the Cheese Trap. She's going to be with us as well. So I hope you can join us for that at the same time. Dr. Barnard, any closing thoughts before we sign off?
Next week, we're going to be talking about why is food so addicting? What's it do to your brain? Why are we hooked on it? And is there something in cheese that can actually be harming your brain? And I'm talking about increasing the risk of something like Alzheimer's disease. You don't want to miss that. But I want to say a huge thank you to you, Michael. Your parents raised you right. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for being at that party with Alec Baldwin. I think you convinced him along with me and many others that compassion can taste great. Thank you, Stephanie, for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. Thank you, Noah, for being a fantastic MC.
Okay, take care, everybody. We'll see you
Bye.
next week, same time.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.